Hey guys, Dave here. Welcome to the Centurion's review. This is Icebergs. This is a game from TSR from 1980, a micro game. We're going to do a little playthrough here. There's a solo game in this and a multiplayer game. The playthrough we're going to do is a solo game, and then I'll show you the difference in the multiplayer rules. The multiplayer game's more interesting, but since I don't have someone to play against right now, we're just going to do the solo rules, but I will explain the differences afterwards. So anyhow, we are the Arctic Queen, and we will start with 8 fuel and 8 cargo. And if we run out of fuel, we lose the game. Or if we have, is it 5 or less cargo or 6 or less cargo? Or if we bring back 5 cargo or less, we lose the game. So the sequence of play is we have 5 movement points, and then we'll roll for collisions if we happen to go in the same space as a iceberg, and then after that we'll roll for ice movement. Ice moves towards your ship, and if there's an ice float or two ice flows or 2 icebergs that are at equal distance, the one nearest the rear of the ship will move towards it. So let's get started. So Ice Queen comes from off the board, moves 1 there. Since they're an ice flow in this space, it costs an extra 1 to move in. So that's 2, 3, and this one 4, 5. Now we roll to see what happens with the ice. We roll a 5. Let me show you the table here. So on a 5, move 1 iceberg and 2 ice flows, 1 space. So we'll move these 2 ice flows into there. And the iceberg. The icebergs are dangerous, so we roll to see if we collide with the iceberg, and we do not. However, next turn it's going to cost, since there's an iceberg there, it will cost 3 extra in each ice flow, 1 extra, and the 1 to move out of the space. So that's 6, so we only have 5 movement points. So to get out of the space, we have to drift. But drifting costs 1 fuel point, and as I mentioned, if you run out of fuel, you lose the game. So let's drift. We drift to there. And let's roll and see what we get. We get a 4 for the ice. And a 4, move 1 iceberg and 1 ice flow, 1 space. So the iceberg and the ice flow move there, and let's roll for a collision. 3, so we didn't collide. So to move out of that space will cost 5. So we move out. Now let's roll for ice again. We roll a 4, and the 4 is move 1 iceberg and 1 ice flow, 1 space. So they come follow us again, do the same thing. Let's roll to see if we collide with the iceberg. Ice flows, if you don't have to worry about colliding, they just slow you down, but icebergs can do damage to you. So got lucky with a 3 again. So they cost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to move out of that space. And we'll roll for the ice. Ice gets a 5, which is move 1 iceberg and 2 ice flows, 1 space. So this iceberg is following us. Roll for collision. 3, we got lucky. But that's going to cost 6 to move out of the space, so we have to drift, which costs 1 fuel. Alright, so let's try to move. That's 2, 3, 4, 5. Roll for ice. Ice gets a 2. Move 2 ice flows, 1 space. So that goes there and that goes there. And we move out of that space, which costs 2, 3, 4, 5. Since we're playing the solo game, we're going to Alaska here, and we're going to Alaska to get more fuel and get more cargo. So we go there, and then after that we'll go back to Newfoundland. But in the solo game you have to exit to Alaska through this space. So let's roll for ice. Ice gets a 6. Move 1 iceberg, 2 spaces. So this one moves here. And roll for collision. Rolled a 3. Wow, got lucky. Alright, so it cost me 4 to move that space, which means I don't have enough to move in the next space because that costs an additional 2. So I have to drift and lose a fuel. Alright, so next turn, 1, 2, 3, and then I'm off the board. Alright, so we're entering the boards that cost 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, sorry, I forgot to move the fuel back up to 8 because we refueled in Alaska. So roll for ice. Ice gets a 5. 1 iceberg and 2 ice flows, 1 space. So boom, boom, boom. Roll for collision. Got a 5 that did collide. So I lose either 1 fuel or 1 cargo. I'm going to lose the fuel. And then we roll again. In the multiplayer game, just like this game, after you collide, you roll 1 more time. In the multiplayer game, if you roll a 6, then you're sunk. However, in the solo version, we didn't roll a 6, but if I did, instead of sinking, then I would have just lost 1 cargo. Alright, so let's roll to get out of there. Actually, that costs exactly 5 to leave that space. That's all we can do. So let's roll for the ice. Ice gets a 6. So that goes there. Actually, that moves 2 spaces, so it moves through my space, but it will still have a chance of colliding with me. So let's see if it collides. It doesn't collide. So that costs 3 to move out of. Oops. Counters are a little thin. 4, 5, and let's roll for ice. Ice, so 1 ice flow moves by me. So on my turn, it'll cost 2 to move out of there. 3, 4, 5, and ice check. That moves there. And so that costs me 2, 3, 4, 5. Ice check. 1 ice moves towards me, so it'll be this one. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And on a 4, move 1 iceberg and 1 ice flow. So this iceberg will move here, and this will move closer to me. So that costs 3, 4, 5, and I'm off the map, and I got enough cargo and fuel to win. So now we're going to explain the difference. This solo is very simple. The multiplayer game is more interesting. Let me explain the difference now. In the multiplayer game, you also start with 8 fuel, but here's the difference. You don't automatically get 5 moves. You roll for movement points. So you'd roll, let's do something a little different. You'd roll so you'd have 2 movement points, so you can move 1, 2 spaces. Or you don't have to use your movement points for movement. You can use them for moving icebergs or for moving ice flows. So you can move, for 1 point you can move an ice flow to a different space, or you can move, for 3 points you can move an iceberg to a different space. What's powerful about that is you're playing with 2 to 6 players, so you can move an iceberg right into a player's ship, and in the multiplayer game, if there's a collision they roll, and if they get a 6 they sink. So what's interesting about that game is you choose how to spend your movement points. Some are for movement, and some are for moving stuff out of your way, and some are for tripping up your opponents. So if your opponent's ahead of you, obviously you're going to try and sink them. Otherwise you're going to lose the game, because whoever brings the most cargo to the destination wins. And another thing with the multiplayer game, say I get to the cargo destination first and I have 8 cargo. Then after I exit with 8 cargo, that means each additional turn, the opponents reduce their cargo by 1. So if it takes, if you're playing a 2-player game and it takes your opponent 2 extra turns to reach the end of the map, they can have a maximum of 6 cargo because they lose 1 cargo per turn. So it's good to get there first, and you want to have the most cargo. Another thing is, if you get to the end of the map and you have 0 cargo, you cannot win the game. And if you roll a 1 for movement, that means you can drift, or you can place an additional ice floe on the map. Drifting is good because if you're out of fuel, that's the only way you can move. So the only way you can move is to roll 1s. And then what's good about rolling a 1 is after you do that, you get to roll again to take another turn. So if you're out of fuel and you keep rolling 1s in a row, you actually get to keep moving. So that's kind of cool. And that's basically how the multiplayer game works. So let's go over what I thought of the game now. So what did I think of Iceberg? I like it. It's fun. I think it's best for younger players. Like if I was between the age of 10 and 16 years old, I would play Icebergs all the time. The solo game's fun if no one's around, but it's kind of simple and you're always going to win. I mean, you'd have to really make some bad decisions to lose the solo game. As far as the multiplayer game, it's more interesting, and in the multiplayer you can actually lose. It's pretty well balanced because you seem to have just enough fuel to reach Alaska and just enough to get back to Newfoundland. And what I like about the multiplayer game is, let's say one of the other players is ahead of you because they've been rolling more 6s than you or something. Well, once they get ahead of you, you can use your movement points instead of moving to move icebergs in them and try to sink them. So a player who has been in the lead the whole game could actually lose at the last minute because one of the other players moves an iceberg and sinks them. So there's like no guaranteed victory in the multiplayer game. The multiplayer game is real simple. I mean, the strategy is how do you use your movement points? Are you going to move? Are you going to move things out of ice floes and icebergs out of your way, or are you going to try and sink someone? So, but for a simple game, I really like it. I think if you have kids, you'll have a lot of fun playing it with your kids. If you're an adult, you'll have fun playing it a few times, and then you'll probably get bored with it. But if you have kids, you could play it with your kids all the time, and it might be an interesting way to introduce your kids to hex and shit board gaming. So I do recommend the game. Just keep in mind that it's simple and it's for beginners, and it's good to play with your kids. So thanks for watching. I hope you liked the video, and if you did, please click like on the video, and if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel. It really helps me out, and as always, have a good evening.